Welcome middle schoolers from Dwell Community Church and the whole World Wide Web. We are continuing in our series from the teaching on the hill. Last time we started at the end and saw that Jesus taught us that we can have stability if we put his words into practice like a house with a strong foundation. We need to do one more thing before we look more closely at the beginning of the teaching on the hill, and that is take a look at who wrote this. Who is Matthew? To get Matthew's story about Matthew's story, turn to Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 to 13. Turn to it in a paper Bible or click here if you don't have one. We saw Jesus meeting a guy, inviting him to follow him. They throw a party and the Pharisees get mad. What's the big deal? Pharisees are always mad about something. Come on. The big deal begins in verse 9. Matthew was a tax collector. You know what that means? He collected taxes. This is not like your Uncle Ralph who works for the Department of Taxation. This was ancient Israel when they were taken over by the Roman Empire. Rome would show up at your door, kill people, destroy a bunch of stuff, and say, guess what? We own you now, but we'll cut a deal with you. We will let you live as long as you promise not to fight us and pay us taxes. And instead of having Roman soldiers go around collect taxes, they would hire local people from those countries. And that's who Matthew was. He was hired by Rome to work against his own country, Israel, to take their money, give it to Rome, and keep some for himself. To get a sense of the kind of guy this is, imagine if we were taken over. Let's say we were taken over by the Pacific Ocean. Mer people. Let's just say we lost World War II and the Nazis had control over America, and your neighbor worked for them and took money from you to give to them. How would you feel about that neighbor? That neighbor is Matthew in this story. Jesus walks up to him and says, "What? He offers this man to follow him, to be one of his disciples?" What would happen if your Nazi-helping neighbor went to a church and they accepted him and welcomed him in? Wouldn't people be furious? Jesus even had dinner with Matthew and all of his friends. Friends? Yes, Matthew would have had some friends because he would have had a lot of money. He was rejected by society in general, so the friends that he would have been other people who were rejected by society, criminals and such. This was all too much for the important religious people of the day, the Pharisees. They confront this and say, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus' response is why he is the GOAT. He makes two very important points about Matthew and his party. Number one, he says it's not healthy people who need a doctor, it's sick people who do. What exactly does he mean by that? He explains it, thankfully. He says, "I have come to call those who know they are sinners." In other words, Jesus is willing to rescue anybody who is willing to admit that we need to be rescued. Matthew knew he was a sinner, so when Jesus came and offered him this gift, Matthew realized that's exactly what it was, a free gift to be able to know Jesus. The Pharisees, on the other hand, were confused about that. They thought they were so righteous and good that they could somehow earn their way to God's love and acceptance. This is extremely important, and Matthew got this, that the only way we can have a relationship with God, the only way we can be on Jesus' side, is to accept that as a free gift. The Bible's word for a free gift like that is grace. In other words, as it says in Ephesians 2, we're saved by grace, and we cannot earn it. Jesus' other point to the Pharisees is when he says, "I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices." He's telling them that loving other people is more important than religious duty. When we experience Jesus' grace and love toward us, it makes us want to give it out to other people. Just like Matthew did by throwing this huge party for all of his friends so they could meet Jesus for themselves. He also gave back all the money he had taken from the poor. That wasn't in this story. But Matthew is one of 4 people who lived very near the time of Jesus who wrote his life story. There was Matthew and John, who were Jesus' students, and then there was Mark and Luke, who were Jesus' students. Those other authors talk about how Matthew gave all that money back to the poor, but Matthew didn't mention it, probably because he didn't want to toot his own horn. After this, Matthew started following Jesus, and he never looked back. So this is who our author is. He's someone who was at an extremely low point, and Jesus offered him his grace. Matthew accepted it, and he allowed the love of God to come to him as a free gift, but also to go through him out to others, all of his friends, and even to us. Because as we read this today, we are still benefiting from what God did in Matthew's life. So now that we've met Matthew, we are ready to go back to the beginning of the teaching on the hill and see next time what Jesus means when he talks about the kingdom of heaven. Hit subscribe, leave your thoughts below, and we will see you then. Until then, be strong in grace.